You've probably heard of Deutsche Bank, one of the biggest investment banks in the world, the massive blue logo, skyscrapers in Frankfurt and New York with billions under management. But what if I told you this bank, once one of the most prestigious investment banks in Europe, has been at the center of almost every major financial scandal in the last 2 decades? From laundering billions for Russian oligarchs to funding terrorists to even helping prop up Jeffrey Epstein's shadowy finances, Deutsche Bank has done it all, and yet somehow they're still alive and kicking. So how did Deutsche Bank fall so far from grace? Why do they keep getting involved in shady deals? And most importantly, how did they survive it all? By the end of this video, you'll understand how one of Europe's biggest investment banks turned into a global financial crime machine. First, for some context, Deutsche Bank wasn't always the bad boy of finance. Founded in 1870, Deutsche Bank was Germany's answer to the big British and American banks. For over a century, they built a rock-solid reputation, financing German industry, rebuilding after World War II, and helping Germany become an economic powerhouse. By the late 1990s and early 2000s, they were Europe's biggest bank, trusted, respected, and managing over $2 trillion in assets. But this is where the story starts to take a twist. Because while other banks played it safe, Deutsche Bank wanted more. More growth, more risk, and more profits, and they were willing to do whatever it took. So then Deutsche Bank had to shift to the riskier part of the banking business. Deutsche Bank had a problem. They wanted to compete with Wall Street titans like Goldman Sachs and JP Morgan, but their home market in Germany was too conservative. So they turned to the high-risk, high-reward world of investment banking, and for a while this worked out really well for them. They became the go-to bank for risky deals, subprime mortgages, complex derivatives, and leveraged trades. At their peak, they were making billions annually from these high-risk stakes bets. But here's the thing with risky bets, they don't always pay off. When the 2008 financial crisis hit, Deutsche Bank got absolutely smashed. Toxic mortgage-backed securities, bad loans, leveraged trades, it all came crashing down, and just like that, the cracks started to show. So what is money laundering? Before we go further, I'll give you guys a quick explanation. The simple version, it's the process of making dirty money look clean. Let's say you made $1 million from illegal activities, maybe smuggling, bribery, or fraud, crypto scam, you never know. You can't exactly walk into a bank and deposit that cash without raising eyebrows. So you run into a series of complicated transactions to hide its origins. For example, place the dirty money into the financial system, you could layer it through complex trades of shell companies, or 3, you could integrate it back into the economy as legitimate money and maybe buy property or art. Banks like Deutsche Bank are supposed to catch these transactions, but spoiler alert, they didn't. In the 2010s, Deutsche Bank started doing business with Russian oligarchs. This is where things started to get spicy. After the financial crisis, Deutsche Bank was desperate for fresh profits, and they found a new, very profitable client base, Russian oligarchs. Between 2011 and 2015, Deutsche Bank got caught in a scandal so big it got its own name, the mirror trading scandal. Here's how it worked. Russian clients would buy stocks in Moscow, let's say for $10 million. Then Deutsche Bank would sell those same stocks in London for the same price, but in US dollars. This sounds innocent, right? Well, this wasn't, because no investment was actually happening. It was just money being washed clean out of Russia and into Western banks. Estimates say over $10 billion in dirty money flowed through this scheme. So who were these beneficiaries? They were Russian oligarchs close to the Kremlin. Now, to give a quick explanation here, when I say Kremlin, it's not just some fancy building in Moscow that you've probably heard of. The Kremlin is basically shorthand for the Russian government, and more specifically, Vladimir Putin's inner circle of power. These are billionaires and power players who built their fortunes through state connections, controlling oil, gas, banking, and heavy industries in Russia. So when Deutsche Bank was moving billions through this scheme, it wasn't just some random guys, it was the most powerful, politically connected elites in Russia getting their money safely into Western markets. I know it sounds crazy, but yeah, Deutsche Bank, one of Europe's biggest financial institutions, was helping Putin's allies smuggle billions out of Russia, and the result? So what was the result for Deutsche Bank? It was a $630 million fine. This sounds like a lot, but at the time, Deutsche Bank was an $80 billion company. But in turn, they ended up losing billions of dollars in market cap, which hurt them a lot more than the fine did. The thing that I thought was pretty crazy about the situation was that no executives went to jail over this, which is pretty insane because I feel like any politicians in these situations would have, instantly went to jail. So if you thought that was, pretty insane, wait until you hear this. So Jeffrey Epstein, the Jeffrey Epstein was a client of Deutsche Bank actually, and after Epstein's conviction, even after 2008 for sex crimes, Deutsche Bank still kept him as a client until 2018, so 10 years later. And during that time, Epstein moved millions through Deutsche Bank accounts. He paid alleged co-conspirators lawyers and clearly had mysteriously large cash withdrawals within this time. So internal Deutsche Bank emails later revealed that they knew Epstein was a very high-risk client, and they even flagged, many of his transactions as suspicious. But, did they cut ties? No, because, Epstein was very profitable for them and Deutsche Bank was super greedy. So Deutsche Bank for this relationship got fined $150 million, and once again, no executive faced criminal charges, which I thought was pretty insane. And there's clearly something pretty sketchy going on here. So many people use the term after this situation, too big to fail. So basically, if you haven't heard this term before, I'll explain it really quick. A bank is considered too big to fail when its collapse would cause massive damage to the economy. So basically like a domino effect. And, if Deutsche Bank would go down, for example, clients would freak out, many markets would crash. Other banks would get dragged into this mess because they're all intertwined. And, the global financial systems would take a very large hit. So that's why the government is typically, bailing these guys out, because it would just destroy the financial system. So instead of letting these guys fail, the governments are usually just finding them, keeping them alive, because the alternative, is a very, very extreme financial collapse that could really hurt the country. So basically, they're too important to punish properly. That's just the beginning of Deutsche Bank's crimes. It sounds pretty crazy, but Deutsche Bank has also been fined for violating U.S. sanctions by doing business with Iran, Syria, and Sudan, so basically terrorists. They failed to monitor suspicious transactions between terrorism. They manipulated global interest rates in the LIBOR scandal. And the cherry on top, they misled investors during the subprime mortgage crisis, which, as everyone knows, was one of the biggest financial disasters in American history. Now, this next number, blew my mind. I want you guys to guess how much Deutsche Bank has paid in fines since the 2008 crash. I'll give you a second. So Deutsche Bank paid over $18 billion in fines and settlements since 2008. That's billion with a B. Now, I don't know about you guys, but my guess was probably going to be close, $1-2 billion maybe, which is, already pretty insane. But yeah, $18 billion. I mean, their market cap is $39 billion. So if you took all the fines that they've paid since 2008, that'd be half their market cap. So how is this possible? How does a bank like this survive scandal after scandal after scandal? And the simple answer is scale. Deutsche Bank is so massive, so globally interconnected, that regulators fear what would happen if they actually shut it down. If Deutsche Bank collapses, it doesn't just take down German finance, it risks dragging down the global financial system. So instead of pulling the plug, regulators just fine them massively, but let them continue to operate. Think of Deutsche Bank like a financial cockroach. No matter what apocalypse hits Wall Street, they somehow still survive. So in conclusion, this is a pretty insane story, and it's a masterclass in two things. It definitely shows corporate greed in its finest and the uncomfortable reality of modern finance where, some institutions are simply too big, too connected, and too essential to fail, no matter how evil they may be. They've laundered billions, enabled criminals, and fueled corruption, yet they continue to operate under the shiny banner of global banking. So next time you see that iconic blue logo, remember behind the polished glass and skyscrapers lies one of the most scandal-ridden institutions in financial history. So if you guys enjoyed this video, drop a like, leave a comment, and subscribe for more stories from the wild side of finance. And hey, if you want me to cover the story of the LIBOR scandal or the collapse of the Lehman Brothers next, let me know. So yeah, comment below what you guys want to see next. I'll see you next time. Bye.